Welcome everyone to our webinar. Today we are gonna talk about a fresh PhD, and our guest is Dr. Zeynep Tuba Sungur. She successfully finished her PhD in October 2020, and her topic is What Education Builds as Nation in Afghanistan, a case of nation building. So she did her PhD at Middle East Technical University in Ankara, Turkey, and what we're going to do is so we will have first 25-30 minutes. We will let our speaker talk about her research, and after that Q&A and discussion. She will explain us what her research is about. Right. So, floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Harun. I will be sharing my screen. First, let me do it. Just a second. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, then I need to give you
permission.
Make host. Yes, I make you the host. Probably you should be able to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Now, do you see it?
Yes, I can see it. Hopefully, everyone sees it.
Okay. So let me start by saying that it's very humbling for me to be here in this international platform as a speaker, and I'd like to thank the London Central Asia Research Network and Dr. Harun and Dr. Gulzad as well for inviting me to give a talk on my research on my PhD dissertation. Needless to say, it's hard to summarize a whole dissertation in half an hour, as you know, but I'll try to be as clear as possible. So let me start very quickly. Dr. Harun has already given some of these details. Now, what I wish to focus here is the title of my dissertation, which is the right place to start with. As you may understand, this study deals with a term that has been popularly that has been used very popularly to describe the case of Afghanistan in post-2001 period, and that is nation building. Of course, you may now ask me, what nation building are you talking about while things are literally crumbling in Afghanistan? Exactly, yes, but you know, looking back, we need to remember that the US-led NATO coalition had intervened into this country 20 years ago with high hopes of things like reconstruction, democracy, state building, and nation building. That's why nation building is the most popular term that describes the last 2 decades in Afghanistan, which provides the context of my dissertation. Another keyword in this title is, as you see, education, which is not a very common field in the study of Afghanistan. But from the start, I need to underline that this study does not constitute research on education per se, assessing or questioning how education should be. Rather, this study uses the resources of education in order to understand the sociology of Afghanistan. So here I will be talking about Afghanistan not in terms of its international politics or security or fundamentalism, but in terms of its social structure. Actually, I wish to show you a different way of looking at Afghanistan, if you will. So let me start with the very basics of the study. As I said, the buzzword nation building was the departing point for my dissertation. In order to understand what is meant by nation building in the specific context of Afghanistan, I have researched into the theoretical discussions in the literature on nationalism. And of this term. So originally, nation building denoted a huge process of modernization that operated through the discourse of nationalism, in the words of scholars like Hobsbawm, Gellner, and others. Of course, these scholars were describing the earlier cases of nation building in Western Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. Whereas when we come to today, we see that nation building has a totally different meaning, which is the integration of a failed state into the world order of nation states in the aftermath of a military intervention. So the goal here is to impose the Western form of nation, as well as nation state, on such states so that they become internationally recognizable units, while the content of nation remains local. So that was the point which urged me to find out about the local content of nation in Afghanistan, or what is called millat. My theoretical research brought education forward as an important platform to observe the idea of nation in a country, especially the compulsory periods of education contain vital content produced by a state in its effort to shape future generations, also reflecting what kind of a society it wishes to generate. So I have specified my research platform as the discourse of education, specifically in the 9-year compulsory period in Afghanistan, to observe the idea of millat. And more specifically, my research question, my major research question, let's say, is what is the content of the idea of nation that is presented in the discourse of education in post-2001 Afghanistan? So in order to answer this question, I have employed three types of primary resources. And they are produced in the local language, which is Dari, or Afghan Persian, as it is called in Afghanistan. Here I should emphasize also that during my PhD studies, I had learned Dari, so I was able to use it in collecting data from the field. So my three main resources were the state documents, the school textbooks, and the expert interviews. And I have employed two different methods of data collection, which is document analysis and semi-structured in-depth interviews. And this variety in resources as well as methods have ensured the triangulation of data in my dissertation, which increased the trustworthiness of this study. Now I'd like to show you these resources in further detail. Here you see my first set of resources, which are the three official documents, including the Constitution, the curriculum framework, and the education law, which were all promulgated in post-2001 period in Afghanistan. These documents provide the legal basis of the discourse of education. So I started my research by reading and analyzing them. Then comes the school textbooks. In total, I have read 12 school textbooks of 4 courses offered in the 9-year compulsory period, which were the social studies, one of which you can see here. It's the social studies textbook for grade 4, civic education, and here's the example again, patriotism, and finally, history. So the textbook content actually provided the core of the discourse of education. And the reason behind this specific sampling is obviously that these courses are the ones who which are supposed to include the idea of nation. So that's why I chose them. And finally comes the expert interviews that I personally conducted during my field research in Kabul. Oh, just a second. Excuse me, there are people waiting to be admitted. So I think I should be doing it as well. Now that I'm the host, okay, I did it. Yeah, the expert interviews. These interviews are personally conducted at the Ministry of Education during my field research in Kabul. Here you see a picture of it, the main entrance to the building. In total, I was able to interview 11 experts, ranging from textbook writers to some of the top officials at the ministry. And these experts actually were the producers of the discourse of education. That's why the content provided by the interviews also are very important. And now I would like to talk briefly about my method of data analysis, which was qualitative content analysis. What makes this method apt for this study is that it is a searching out of underlying themes in the materials being analyzed. What I basically did here was to examine the entire discourse of education and specify the most coherent themes emerging out of this discourse. And then I brought together under these themes all the data coming from my primary resources. And the result was a thick description, in the words of Geertz, which has given a detailed picture of the idea of nation. So here we arrive, the idea of the millat-e Afghanistan, or the nation of Afghanistan. In the first theme, we see the most visible and concrete symbols of the nation, including the national flag, the national anthem, and the national heroes. And then we see the memory of nation, which is presented as common history in the discourse of education. You can see their dairy equivalents in parentheses. And then comes the more abstract concepts of nation, including the national unity, citizenship, national will, and national interests. And finally, all this analysis brings forward 4 major elements of nation, which are first, Islam, second, qawm or qawm. Qawm is the plural word, qawm is the singular word. I'll be explaining it further. And third, Afghaniyat or Afghanness. And fourth, watan or the homeland. As this part forms the core of my dissertation, here I will be focusing on these 4 elements specifically. So let me start with Islam, which emerges as the basis of the millat-e Afghanistan, which is described as a Muslim nation and a Muslim nation that is part of the Islamic Ummah. The primary reason behind this Afghanistan is an Islamic republic, and its policies are shaped accordingly. Besides, the society of Afghanistan, in my interviews, was consistently described as an Aqidawi society, which means that it is a society of religiously observant people. So in line with these 2 points, Islam diffuses into all the national symbols and concepts constructed by the state. For example, in the national flag, here you see, as well as the national emblem, the national flag actually includes the national emblem, as you see, they are the same. Here you see a building with two flags, which suggests that this building actually represents the homeland of Afghanistan. And inside this building, you see a mihrab and a minbar. The mihrab is altar, as far as I know, and the minbar is the pulpit, which represents a mosque. So it actually reflects the centrality of Islam in the homeland of Afghanistan. And this idea is supported further by Arabic inscriptions above the building, which goes first Allahu Akbar, Allah is greatest, and above it comes the Islamic Shahada, or the testimony. And similarly, in the national anthem, we hear the Islamic expression Allahu Akbar again, chanted for 3 times. And also when we look at national heroes, we see that they are predominantly the Shohada, or martyrs, and Ghazian, or the war veterans. And both of these heroes are heroes fighting in the name of God. And it reflects an Islamic understanding of heroism. As for national concepts, we see Islam underlined as the most basic commonality among the people of Afghanistan. Here is what an expert said on this. Between the many ethnic groups living in Afghanistan, we do not see many common points, so Islam acts as a common point between them. And here is an excerpt from one of the textbooks, which says, Islamic Brotherhood constitutes the foundation of the national unity of the people of Afghanistan. As you see, the concept of national unity is based on Islamic Brotherhood in the discourse of education. With this said, I pass on to the second element in the idea of nation, which is qawm, as I said. The qawm come forward as the components of the millat-e Afghanistan. For nation of Afghanistan is understood as some of the qawm, which is also stated by one of my respondents. At this point, I'd like to explain the concept of qawm very briefly here, which is actually a keyword in understanding the society and social structure in Afghanistan. I have chosen not to translate this concept throughout my dissertation, not using the English equivalents offered for it, like ethnic group or tribe or clan, for the simple reason that this concept does not have a fixed meaning in the context of Afghanistan, and it is largely dependent on the specific context. And whether it's ethnic group or tribe, qawm has a legal basis in Afghanistan because the constitution officially recognizes it as a unit of social membership. Here is what Article 4 says on it. The nation of Afghanistan is composed of all individuals who possess the citizenship of Afghanistan. The nation of Afghanistan shall be comprised of Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, etc., and other tribes. So here, in total, the constitution recognizes 14 qawm that are living in Afghanistan. Actually, this article defines the idea of nation based on 2 levels of membership. The first one through individual Afghan citizenship, and the second one through group membership, which is more common in the discourse of education. Here is how a respondent describes it. Qawm in a nation is like a garden. This is the big garden of Afghanistan. The Tajik are like a flower, the Pashtun are like another flower. We build up a nation out of the collection of qawm. So this quotation reflects how this group-based understanding of nation is perceived. The same attitude is also reflected on the national anthem, whereby we hear the names of those 14 qawm chanted one by one. Besides the ethnonym Afghan, which is given as an umbrella overall. Yet, in describing national unity, we do not see an idea of unity based on an individual level, but unity based on the unity of the qawm, based on a group level. See this vital excerpt from the textbook of Class 6 Social Studies, which says, the state is obliged to provide services to all the qawm. All the qawm respect the rights of one another so that national unity becomes stronger. National flag, national anthem, national police, national army, and education of all are the signs of the unity of the qawm of Afghanistan. In this statement, we see that the main actors are not individuals, but the qawm. It is the qawm that the state needs to serve, and it is the qawm that should be respecting one another. And most importantly, national symbols appear as the signs of the unity of the qawm. So I pass on to the third element in the idea of nation, which is Afghaniyat or Afghanness, which is presented as the identity of the millat-e Afghanistan. Notice that in the discourse of education, it is not the Afghan nation, but the nation of Afghanistan, and we will see shortly why. The legally recognized citizen identity is given in the Constitution, Article 4 as follows. The word Afghan shall apply to every citizen of Afghanistan. But what happens in reality on the ground is that the ethnonym Afghan and the concept of Afghanness are controversial concepts among the public. The reason is the claim that the ethnonyms Afghan and Pashtun have historically meant the same thing, so Afghan actually denotes Pashtun, which is one of the 14 qawm actually, and they claim to be the majority. So this conceptualization of national identity based on Afghanness is not accepted by all, especially by the non-Pashtuns. Among my respondents, I have also seen a divergence at this point. For example, this one, let's see what she says. Everybody must accept themselves first as Afghans, then comes the qawm. At the top is the national identity, which is common. On the other hand, we hear another expert who is more critical, which goes, everything is based on the Pashtuns. Our national identity is defined based on the Pashtun culture. So Pashtun people have a stronger sense of national identity than others. So it is due to this controversy around Afghaniyat that it is weakly conceptualized in the discourse of education. And to ease the tension around it, two facilitators have been offered. First is that Islam is presented as the primary feature of Afghanness. As this excerpt says, the distinct religion of Islam constitutes the first and most important element of the national identity of the nation of Afghanistan. And second, Afghaniyat is always accompanied by qawm identities in the discourse of education. It means that each time we see a reference to the Afghanness, we see it followed by a recognition of the qawms. See this quotation, which says, as an Afghan, you have your own belongings to qawms. They are not contradicting each other. So this expert basically says that being an Afghan means belonging to a qawm, and it is just a part of Afghanness. After all, it is legalized through the constitution as well. So these two facilitators show an effort of accommodating the national identity among the Islamic identity and the Qawmi identities. And finally, in the fourth element, we see the idea of watan or homeland, which is presented as a homeland of the millat-e Afghanistan. And the nation of Afghanistan is described as the inhabitants of a land of Islam, or what is called the Darus Salam. In the discourse of education, we encounter various depictions of the homeland, such as the Heart of Asia, based on Muhammad Iqbal's famous poem, as well as the Graveyard of Conquerors, as this excerpt also shows. And most importantly, the homeland is depicted as a country with imposed borders, by which is meant the Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which was delineated by the British in 1893. Other than that, the homeland is also depicted through metaphors, such as a common house in which all the qawm live like brothers. See this excerpt again, which says, Afghanistan is the common house of numerous qawm. In this country, Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, and other qawm live like brothers side by side. So here we see again the concept of Islamic brotherhood is evoked. As for the idea of homeland in relation to the idea of nation, we see that the primary national interest in Afghanistan is to defend the watan, which is the land of Islam, with jihad. Here is what an expert says on it. It is important for students to love their homeland, work for it, fight for it, and become a martyr for it. We should teach this to students. If we do not love our country, it may be invaded. We should prepare our students for sacrifice. This statement suggests an Islamic understanding of war and struggle, that is the jihad, and an Islamic understanding of patriotism based on defending the Dar es-Salam, meaning as the land, the homeland is described as a land of Islam, it needs to be defended by the inhabitants, by the nation of Afghanistan, through an Islamic concept of war. So, here is basically what we see. The millat-e Afghanistan in the discourse of education is described with Islam as its basis, qawm as its components, Afghaniyat as its identity, and watan as its homeland. On the other hand, we see that we also see a weak conceptualization of the individual citizens. For the official identity, which is the Afghan identity, is a controversial identity. Therefore, group identity or qawm identity comes more on the foreground, not to offend anyone. Secondly, we see a weak conceptualization of the state here. This is not to say that we do not see any content related to the state in the discourse of education. On the contrary, we do see, especially in the civic education textbooks, lots of material explaining what a state means and what types of state there are. But the point here is that the state rarely appears in relation to the idea of nation. Instead of the state, it is the concept of homeland that comes forward. The discourse of education is filled with references to living in a homeland under a single flag and with a constitution. You know what is meant by a flag and the constitution is basically the state, but it is not pronounced as such. Another point to be underlined is that the state is actually viewed as a government. This is what I understood during my interviews. There was a general preference for the word government rather than the state. It shows that the state is understood as an impersonal. It shows that the state is not understood as an impersonal institution, but as the people who are in power, which is something that greatly influences people's perception of the state. What we need to underline here that these two weakly conceptualized entities, the citizens and the state, actually constitute the two modern institutions which together make up the modern nation and the nation state. This is the point which clearly shows that the idea of nation in Afghanistan is different from the modern concept of nation that has originated from the West. And what else does this conceptualization tell us about the society of Afghanistan? It highlights two dominant institutions in the society, which are the qawm and the ummah. And they are intrinsically tied to the idea of nation or millat. References to nation are consistently accompanied by references either to the qawm or the Islamic ummah. The reason is that the idea of millat becomes intelligible only through the qawm and the ummah. In very brief terms, that is how the Western concept of nation is carefully accommodated within the local context of Afghanistan. In conclusion, let me say that this study can make a contribution basically to two fields, the sociology of Afghanistan, as well as the literature on nation building. How the state conceptualizes the idea of nation actually reflects their way of thinking about society. This study does not take the concept of nation as granted, presuming that the people of Afghanistan will have the same perception as the people in the West. On the contrary, this study looks at how a Western concept is locally perceived and managed on the ground. Considering the many misinterpretations that Afghanistan has been suffering, this study constitutes an effort to understand it in its own terms. And this effort produces a case study of Afghanistan, which proves that what is meant by nation building today is the imposition of the Western form into a local content, which may not accord with one another. That's where I stop for now, and I'll be happy to receive your questions. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this great presentation. Now, it was, I learned a lot personally, and I'm sure there are some comments and questions will come now in the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So why don't we, if you might want to write your questions in the chat, or you might want to just turn on your voice and video and share with us. Who would like to be the first? Okay, Guy, you go first.
Yes, it's so interesting. There's so many different areas I can ask questions, but I just wanted the last bit where you said the state and the government being seen as the same. That's interesting concept. Yes, as you put it, it's very different, but at the same time, don't we see that, for example, in other countries as well? Don't we see that in, let's say, in Central Asia, or don't we see that in Turkey, for example? Or is it different in your view from the perceptions that we see in neighboring countries, for example? In Afghanistan, it kind of stands out. If you could elaborate on that a little bit. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. About the neighboring countries, I don't think I can say a lot. Because this is this study is based on a very detailed field research and interviews, and how I formulated, how I arrived at this conclusion is after reading so many textbooks and after having so many interviews at the ministry. I think it's a very important point, actually, because when people view the state as an impersonal institution, as an institutionalized form, then their attitude towards the state will be different. And if they view it as a government based on people, based on the rulers, then it will be different. And especially in the context of Afghanistan, where qawm is a very distinct and dominant institution, people tend to think on social circles or organizations in terms of qawm. That's why some of the people tend to view the state, the government, sorry, they say government, the government in terms of a specific qawm as well. More specifically, they sometimes told me that, this is a Pashtun government. So here we see that we see an idea that, the government belongs to a specific qawm. And here we understand that they don't have a perception of an impersonal state. And, this is, of course, related to the process of modernization, of course, because, the institutionalization of the state is a very important part of the huge process of modernization. So where there is no such process, then the state fails to be institutionalized as well. And it's we see its reflections everywhere else, including the discourse of education.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the question and a great answer. So who would like to go for the next question or comment? Oops. Anyone else? I have actually a question, if I may. In national discourses, there's always national histories. They always have some historic heroes written in their history books. There is a certain preference, political preference, about whom to include and or exclude from the past. And there are sometimes contradictions, because a neighboring country, because national identities, nation building always in a way draws thick lines in the past. So sometimes you take a historical character into your narrative, but that historical character sometimes is already incorporated into another nation building project. Like in Ukraine and Russia is a great example. In Europe also we have examples like Charlemagne, whose hero is it, German or French? Or in Ukrainian, Russian case, the Kievan Rus principality, and it is always a contested territory. So if we go back to Afghanistan, is there any contested territory, contested figures in the past like this, perhaps with Iran, Pakistan, or Tajikistan? You never know. That was my question. Is there anything disputed figures of the past?
Yes, there are, because, actually, some of my respondents during the interviews at the Ministry of Education, some of the school textbooks actually, they told me that what matters for them is the larger Persian civilization. So they include heroes coming from, Central Asia or Iran as well, because, the Persian civilization is much, it covers a larger geography. So some of the people whom you see in Central Asia, some of the heroes, you also see in the textbooks of Afghanistan as very important people. Some of for example, there was this Ali Shir Nevai, Abu Rayhan, and similar, Islamic figures as well. So this choice of writing about heroes is based not only on Persian civilization, but also on the Islamic civilization. So when you go back to history, you in not like ancient, but like in the medieval history, you don't see the territory of Afghanistan like today's in today's borders. That's why they try to adopt those heroes or rulers or scientists like Ibn Sina, as well. There are many figures, but you know, I try to remember while speaking. So they adopt all these figures as their national heroes, as people who are important for the homeland of Afghanistan, and they try to teach about them to the students. So yes, as we do not see the nation building process as we know it in Western Europe, in Afghanistan, here we don't see the reflection of this project into the discourse of education. What I'm trying to say is that they don't think about the national borders of Afghanistan while trying to construct an idea or an idea of nation. They don't really care about the borders. Actually, as I showed it in my presentation, one of the borders, which is the Durand Line with Pakistan, is consistently described as an imposed border. Meaning that maybe some of you may know about the history of that border. That border is actually one of the most problematic borders in the world right now. It was delineated by the British at the end of the 19th century, more than 100 years ago. But by the way, at that time there was no Pakistan, there was India, British India. And when the state of Pakistan was established in 1947, it adopted this border, but the people of Afghanistan, as well as the state of Afghanistan, they protested against it, saying that no, this border was delineated by the British India, so we don't accept it as the international border. And still, their attitude is in this way, as far as I see in the textbooks, because as I told you, it's consistently described as an imposed border. It means that there is a problem here with the conceptualization of territorial integrity, which is a very important concept, as we know, in the discourse of nation building and nationalism. So here the country itself says that they don't recognize one of its longest borders. And what does this mean? I mean, on the ground, we know that this border is as it's not recognized, people living in both sides of the border, which are generally the Pashtun tribes, they pass the border easily, like on a daily basis. There are families living on both sides of the border. So, you know, when you think of the terms like the modern nation and the sovereignty of a nation and the territorial integrity, all these concepts become very problematized because of this border. Yeah, I think I should stop here.
Great. That's I think very important, an important aspect, because I guess when the territory is not well defined, then to build an identity based on the territory is very difficult.
Exactly.
You start to move towards either religious identity or ethno-linguistic identity, which brings its own challenges in a multi-ethnic territory. So there's kind of a being between hard place and a rock, you know, it's difficult to find an exit there, and thank you so much for this important aspect sharing with us. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Not a question, but I would thank again for this nice presentation, and it was nice to see smiling schoolgirls at the end of the presentation, just after the sad terror attack in Kabul, where many schoolgirls are killed, actually. And I will thank again, or teşekkür, as you wrote at the end.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, what you say is very important. I know about the bombing, unfortunately. Yeah, bombing of the schools is unfortunately is like an everyday reality in Afghanistan, especially the bombing of the schools of girls, the female students. You know, in Afghanistan, in the first 9-year compulsory period, there is no gender segregation, so they are generally mixed in classes, but starting with the 10th grade in high schools, the schools are gender segregated, so there are schools for female students and male students. And unfortunately, the female education institutions are generally seen as a threat to, you know, to fundamental circles in the country, which is topped by the Taliban, of course. That's why they have been the targets, unfortunately, and I hope for a better future, of course. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to work on the field of education, basically, to, you know, to have an insight into the life of little children in Afghanistan and to see what kind of books they're reading and what they are learning. I think it's very important because, you know, these books, you know, in Afghanistan, the state does not have full authority in the country. As we know, you know, the situation right now is very complicated because the US is set to withdraw from Afghanistan by September 2021. So we don't know about the future. The Taliban will be coming back probably, but we don't know under what conditions and how yet, at least. What was I going to say was that in such critical situations, you know, I think looking at everyday lives of people is also very important. That's why I wanted to work on the sociology of Afghanistan, not on politics, international security, blah, blah, because these issues are generally, you know, evoked in relation to Afghanistan, but we don't know what happens in people's daily lives, in students' everyday lives, you know, with what ideas they are being brought up. This is very important because it shows us what kind of people are being generated. Like in 10 years or 20 years time, what kind of people will we be seeing in Afghanistan? I mean, yes, the state does not have full authority across the country, but still these textbooks, they are sent to all the corners of the country, especially in the rural areas, which make up the majority of the population, actually. Yes, we need to underline it here as well, because of majority of the Afghan population lives in the rural countryside. It makes like 75% of the population. It means that only 25% of the population lives in cities, one of which is Kabul, which is the most populated city. So especially in these rural areas, in villages, you know, you might see pictures of schools, which do not even have a building at all. You might see just a blackboard and a student, an older student maybe, or just someone who is not even a teacher, who is holding a textbook in his or her hand and, you know, trying to teach something to the kids who are sitting on the ground. And there is no walls around, nothing. They are just outside, sitting and trying to, you know, engage in education, let's say. So it's what makes these textbooks important. Even where we don't see proper school buildings in rural areas, we do see the textbooks there. That's why the content of these textbooks are very important in shaping the mindset of the young people in Afghanistan.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Gulzat, yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Zeynep, for your presentation. It was really interesting to hear it. I wanted to ask you, I mean, I think related to what you just said right at the end about the textbook. So I'm a bit curious about the period that you kind of captured. So the textbooks that you analyzed, are they like produced in the last decade, or have you looked at some of the textbooks which existed before, or what was your approach in selecting them? Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, these textbooks, they were produced in the post-2001 period by the Ministry of Education. By the way, we should also underline it that these textbooks are written by the civil servants, basically working at the Ministry of Education. But still, I should also add that, yes, I mean, starting with 2001 and afterwards, there was a textbook reform program. Because, the textbook, the situation of textbooks, their content was in such a mess. Before 2001, the textbooks included both very fundamentalist elements of the Mujahideen and the Taliban period, and some of the communist elements of the Soviet era. I don't want to say Soviet era, but, there was this this period when Afghanistan was largely under the influence of the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s, let's say. So that's why there needed to be a textbook reform as soon as modern education, as soon as there was an effort for, re-establishing the institutions of modern education, because the textbooks, they provide the core of education. And what I also would like to say is that, when we look at the textbooks of the older period, especially of the Mujahideen and the Taliban era, I was really shocked to see them. There was this mathematics textbook where you would see the numbers depicted through a number of different objects. And there you would see, for example, 2 guns, 3 bombs, and all these kinds of things. The children would be learning, counting, and the numbers through these objects. And for example, there was a mathematics problem again, which goes like, in a war, 3 Russian soldiers were killed, and and how many others were left, things like that. The discourse of these textbooks was very much problematic, and that's why the experts at the Ministry of Education, as soon as the UNICEF started a campaign for back to school campaign in 2001, they also started a textbook reform project with the help of international organizations like the UNESCO, as well as the UNICEF. But of course, what they told me was that they showed us the main framework. They showed us the know-how, and they didn't interfere with the content. So the content belongs to us, and they're very, strict on this issue. They kept telling me this. They said that these textbooks are produced by Afghans and for Afghans. They are not foreign. It's an important issue for them because, because of all of this history of foreign interventions and the shaping of minds in line with foreign policies. So they are a bit, protective, like conservative, trying to conserve their discourse of education. Yes, that's all I can say, I think.
Thank you. Thanks.
Brilliant. Any other, perhaps last question, because we are coming to the end of.
I have one.
Please, yes.
Thank you very much. It was a beautiful, beautiful, interesting talk and many interesting issues. The last one about the 1 bomb and 3 guns made my day. I mean, sad as well as funny. My question is this. Many modern nationalities often are being constructed against an enemy, right? You know, just kind of some kind of threat, external threat or external enemy, challenging enemy. So given that, and plus given the fact that the Afghanistan is being invaded or interfered by major powers, British, Russians, Americans, how does it play in the construction of modern Afghan nationality and discourse? One, a foreign enemy and external threat, ideally a neighbor, plus these distant players that have frequently interfered and tried to engineer the country from outside.
Okay, thanks for the question. Yes, it's an important issue. You know, foreign intervention constitutes an important point, let's say, an important issue in the discourse of education, because especially in the textbooks of history that I read, I have seen a discourse of defense against foreign interventions, and basically two foreign interventions are consistently referred to. The first of which is the British in the 19th century, and the second of which is the Soviets, the USSR. And all these ideas of, you know, protecting the watan, protecting the homeland and defending it are actually based on this protection against the foreign threats. And in the discourse of history, you see it on the basis of these two foreign powers, as I've told. But of course, considering the current state of affairs, I mean, in the post-2001 period, you don't see any kind of reference to the US-led NATO occupation, which is ongoing in this 20 years. You don't see any reference to it. Plus, as you said, there might also be some references to a neighbor. Yes, there are, because, you know, the two most important neighbors of Afghanistan, which are Iran and Pakistan, they are also Islamic republics, by the way. So there's this contradiction, actually, because, you know, the discourse of education offers Islam and Islamic Brotherhood as, you know, as a unifying factor. But at the same time, it also shows two neighbors who are also Islamic republics, Iran and Pakistan, not in a positive light, let's say. The first reason is because of the Durand Line, as I told you. You know, there is this historic enmity of border issue going between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and it's consistently written in the textbooks that this border is not recognized by the people of Afghanistan. This should be underlined. Maybe they say that it's not recognized by the people. It's not written, it's not recognized by the state. No, the people, it says. Because, you know, I think that the euro, it is recognized as an international border, but de facto, people they consistently pass the border, as I told you. So yes, both Iran and Pakistan, although they are also parts of the Islamic Ummah, like Afghanistan, they appear as the antagonists of Afghanistan in this picture, let's say, in this picture of nation. They are the two neighbors, and as for the foreign threats, in history, we see them as the British and the Russians.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
it's. Thank you very much for the questions and for this great presentation and answers as well. As a last call, if there is any other question or comment before we close, Let's see. Let me pause for a second. No, there is no signal from anyone. Okay. Maybe we, Tuba, we would like to perhaps say a few last words, if you like, while we close.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you once again. It's been a pleasure for me to present my work here. And I wish to be able to present it in person, hopefully, in some parts of the world. I don't know, but I really miss going to conferences, as all of you. So I wish to see you in person, hopefully.